Hey people, do you want to get your music into Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Tidal, and all the rest of the streaming services? Check out DistroKid. It's affordable and super easy to use. I've used it to distribute my music and I really dig it. Our listeners get 30% off at distrokid.com/talkguitars. That's 30% off for our listeners at distrokid.com/talkguitars. Go get it. Hey everybody, it's Chris and Rick Talk Guitars, and today we want to talk about unintended consequences. Chris shared a cool video with me from Mark Stutman at Folkway Music, or I shared it with you.
You shared it with me. Oh, come on, man.
That's right. Hey, it's a senior moment.
I want to start this episode on a lie.
I'm going to rewind. I shared this video with Chris from Mark Stutman of Folkway Music. He is a well-known luthier and repair person up in Canada. And he's got a shop called Folkway Music. Shout out to him. He's a really, really knowledgeable, talented person. And he put this video together talking about 70s Martins and how they used these big rosewood bridge plates and how the tops were thinner at that particular time in Martin, and how a lot of people who have these Martins want to do the mod where they put in the smaller bridge plate for, quote, better sound, without thinking about the initial engineering that went into this era of Martin. And so Chris and I thought it would be really cool to talk about this and extrapolate it across the whole guitar spectrum, because it made us both think about, different ways we all have maybe wanted to mod something without really thinking about the unintended consequences of that mod. And for instance, for these Martins in the 70s, when people would want to do the mod where they had the smaller bridge plate put on, they didn't think about the fact that this era of Martin, the tops were thinner because they used that big bridge plate. And so if they wanted to put a smaller bridge plate on, that would put more tension on the top when you strung it up. And sure enough, what would occur is these little humps would appear on either side of the bridge, at the back of the bridge, because the top was thinner than previous era Martins that had the smaller bridge plates. And so it would stress the top out, and you'd see these little humps appear over time because the thinner top just couldn't handle the stress of the strings. And so that's an unintended consequence of this mod that people wanted to have done to their guitars to have them, quote, sound better. And so, Chris and I just thought, oh, well, there's all kinds of things we could talk about that kind of fit into this as well. So, Chris, why don't you start us off with maybe a couple that come to mind, and then that'll get the ball rolling a little bit.
Sure, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, I think you described it pretty good, but I want to maybe just a little go more in depth, because this is something that I always thought of too. It was the general practice of getting a really good vintage Martin without spending the big bucks was you find a 70s Martin and you do a couple things to them. Some of the 70s Martins have the bridge in the wrong place, so you have to have the bridge moved.
Yep.
And they have the big rosewood bridge plate, which, the traditional bridge plate for those Martins was a smaller maple bridge plate.
Yeah.
So a lot of people said that's where a lot of the sound comes from.
Right.
So these people would buy a 70s Martin and they'd take it to a luthier and have them pull the rosewood bridge off, stick a maple bridge on there, and also at the same time move the bridge. I think it was back. They had to move it back like a little bit. And then they would have basically a really good Martin, guitar with all this that's all broken in and aged, and it was closer to what the true vintage ones would be. And that was a modification that a lot of people just did. It was something that we thought was a good thing to do. And even this person at Folkway who made this video and was telling us about this, he had done that in the past. This is something that he did. He thought it was a reasonable thing to do these guitars. But after doing this, at some point, he took out some calipers and he started measuring the tops of Martin guitars. And that's when he learned that during the 70s, the Martin guitars, I don't know the reason that they did this. There was maybe something wasn't as available or something like that. It was a D35 is the one that had the biggest issues with it. And that has that back with the three pieces of rosewood that they kind of wanted to make it that way so they could use up some of the wood. So he found out that those were even thinner in the 70s than the other ones, even though generally the whole line was thinner.
Yeah.
And so he also noticed that when he was doing these modifications, it was really hard to get the bridge plate out without, kind of, destroying the top or,
Yeah.
doing damage to the top. So he didn't like that. And then he looked into it. The more he looked into it, he came to realize that the people at Martin, these are like guitar builders, luthiers, that studied guitar their entire lives or whatever. They designed this guitar to be that way. They're like,
Yeah.
we have this set of materials, so we don't have this aspect. So we have to switch things up to make a good sounding Martin guitar. And so what they did was they used a thinner top, a thicker bridge plate made out of a different material to counter that. So,
Yeah.
we have the thinner top and this different style bridge plate gives us the same relative sound as, the old way. But we're going to do it this way because whatever changed or something like that. So the moral of the story is that there's a lot of these things. Somebody actually designed these things, and they designed it to
Yeah.
be a certain way. And we've just grown accustomed to believing that we know better. We know that a single piece neck is better than a three-piece
Right.
neck,
Right.
or just in general. And that was a really good video, and it made me realize that not just with guitar, but across the board, if we follow the example as this person did that science does, it's like we'd all be in a better place. His view was, until this point in time, I believe that this was a legitimate modification. It was a good thing to do. But when this new information became available to me, I changed my mind. I'm like, wait a
Yes.
minute.
Yes.
I'm not going to do it. He doesn't do those anymore. He doesn't recommend doing those anymore because of you can ruin the top. And it's
Yep.
like the guitar was to sound like designed by a designer to sound like it sounds. So if you don't like that, get another guitar.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was really cool. And I kind of myself have always tried to operate that way. Like I'll believe something. And, if I find it to be, if more information becomes available and I find out it's not true, I'm happy to change my opinion because
Yeah.
then I get to be right. I want to be right. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So, and, we do that with everything. The Tube Screamer is a classic example. I talk about the Tube Screamer all the time because I fucking love it. But this is the pedal that some designer made, this Japanese designer made, and it was amazing. He made
Yeah.
it amazing, and he had a certain sound he was going for, and he got that certain sound. And there's a bunch of people that say, it's too much mid-range. I don't like it. Well, and that's fine. That's legitimate. So get another pedal. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But to try to make up for that by, like have somebody that sits on their living room floor and sticks resistors and capacitors in there until it sounds good to his ear. And then, it's like, no, I mean, I think the designer kind of knew what they were doing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Pickups. It's always that. Someone gets a guitar and it's like, yeah, this guitar doesn't sound good till they won't even listen to the pickups.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in like a Gibson where, the company that invented the PAF, we won't, we're not going to listen because I'm going to get this boutique pedal that someone learned to make pickups by watching YouTube
Yeah.
videos.
Yeah.
I believe them more than I believe Gibson because it's
Right.
just fucking crazy. You know what I mean? It's like nothing can be stock, or we just don't trust people who make this stuff anymore. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I like the way you framed it, and that's exactly right. It's like there's this weird thing about us that wants to say, oh, well, somebody made this, but and it's not to say that everything that has been made is perfect or that maybe they missed something but what Chris is saying, I totally believe, especially with musical instruments and pedals and stuff like that, is there was intention, right? There was intention, informed intention. It wasn't just some person winging it. I mean, especially Martin was well into building guitars in the 70s. I mean, Jesus, they were started in the 1800s. So they were no newbies to building guitars. And so there was intent and informed intent behind these guitars, as he says, and they were built a certain way for certain reasons, and the top was built a certain way to withstand the force that the strings would put on the top, and so that's a big topic that comes from this video that we watched. But I also thought it was curious too that there's also stuff you can do. So say you have a vintage instrument, or it's even not necessarily quote vintage, but worth some dough, but vintage particularly, if you get a vintage Strat or Les Paul or whatever it is, and you start to swap out parts or mod the guitar in some way, that's going to degrade the value of the guitar. And also, as Chris is saying, these guitars are built a certain way for certain reasons, right? I mean, a Strat is built a certain way with single coil pickups and all of this stuff to sound a certain way. And especially Fender, like I think they were very much trying to build guitars and amps that matched, and would sound good with each other. And so they were all built with this informed intent. And I love that Chris made the analogy to just science. Well, it's not an analogy, actually. It's a way of thinking about the world, right? Like the stuff we come in contact with and buy, it's not because somebody was just winging it and decided to throw it out into the marketplace. Especially with these major manufacturers we're talking about, they have years and years and years of experience, and the people building and designing these things are engineers, audio engineers and educated and informed people. And so, yeah, I just think it is cool to think about and think about in not only the context in terms of like, okay, what was the informed intent of these people for how this was going to sound and how it operates, but also what you can do, if you alter these things, what are you really doing to the thing you just bought? Like, for instance, exactly, a tube screamer. It's designed to sound a certain way. I love them. I love the way it sounds. I love the mid-range it produces, but rather than go out and buy a new pedal that sounds the way I want it, some people think, oh, well, if I mod this, and it's totally cool, you can do it. But the like Chris is saying, it's like there was an intent behind this. It's not like you're fixing something that's broken. It's like you're modifying it now to accommodate your ear, which is not the same as fixing something that is broken. And I guess is that kind of a good way to put it, Chris? Like,
Yeah,
we think we're fixing something that's broken, which is not really broken, but yeah.
but I mean, I can see. I'm definitely going to offer a counterpoint to this too, because there are cases I can say where it's like this item was designed for a certain price point. So there's some things that
Mm,
you can, the core of this thing is amazing and it's like super good quality, but we see
yeah.
them some other places that, where you can, where an example would be like a vintage melody maker, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful guitar, it's really close to a Junior. It's great. I don't really like the pickup that much that they
Yeah.
put in there. And that
Yeah.
was the designer,
That's true.
but it designed that more to fit a price point. But
Right.
what you can do is you can drop a P90 in there with zero modification whatsoever and put the original in the case.
Yeah.
Another example would be these Music Master bass amps that we have.
Ah, that's a good point. Yeah.
They had the most horrible speaker in the world. But I have
Yeah.
heard people say that I actually happen to like the speaker.
Yeah.
And well, good for you. That's cool. But it's more like, that Martin was such a good example because it was something that was like, we have these high standards that we have set ourselves to, even though this was the 70s when everybody, quality was, whatever, everybody kind of like slipped a little bit, but they did it for a reason. And I don't know how many D35s you've heard, but every one I've ever heard has been pretty amazing.
That's
you know what
cool.
I mean?
I haven't heard of
and
it.
and I don't think any of those had like a changed bridge play. You know what I mean? So it was
Yeah.
they made it to sound specifically like
Yeah.
they gave it its own sound. It was kind of like a D28, but it's got more bass. So it's they definitely hit the nail on the head. So there is I guess it's not like set in stone, thou shalt not mod, because I think that's not true. But it's the idea that it is that everything somebody makes can be improved by me or improved by somebody that really that
Yeah.
doesn't have the level of design, didn't design the thing from the ground up. Some of these
Yeah.
things, like my example of somebody that takes, there's a lot of pedal modders out there or something like that. Just take a standard pedal and just swap, shotgun parts out of it until it sounds good to them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then electronically, it might not. It might be a really bad idea, And people
Right. Right.
are like, yeah, well, I'll try that, whatever, that's cool. I've done all this stuff. I'm putting that right out here right now. I've modded tube screamers. I've changed pickups in guitars where I shouldn't
Yep.
have done that,
Yep.
and all this. I've done all that stuff, and I've kind of learned. So it's kind of that thing, It's like that dude did these processes to those D35s and those 70s Martins until he learned. That's kind of like me. It's like
Yeah.
I learned that, some of the stuff is better off being kept alone. So I guess it's a personal journey largely too. But it's definitely worth thinking about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And I like the way you couch the counterpoint or the caveat to say, there are, yeah, there are exceptions to the rule, or and it's not even a rule. It's just like more like I think yeah, I'm picking up on Chris's mindset of like just this idea we a lot of us have that oh, we're fixing something, we're making something better that they did, it's or fixing something that's broken, which isn't the case. And I like the caveats you brought up, like for price point or something like that. And also that was characteristic of a lot of the manufacturers. As bean counters came into the system and they wanted to save money, they started to do things that might be considered cutting corners, or well, just cost savings, right? Like, how can we do this cheaper? And so yeah, the Music Master bass amp is a great example, and the other example you cited was great too. I think that mindset taken to extreme is what we're talking about, in terms of just assuming that this thing that I have in my hands that I want to improve, quote, improve or something, wasn't thought about or wasn't informed before I got it. And I have to fix it somehow. And yeah, the journey of Mark Stutman was empirical too, because he started to see these, the top fail essentially. And
Right.
as you said, it's like, okay, the mind has to change now, because this mod is not a great idea, because I'm seeing the results of it physically, empirically, and it's not good. So, and like
Yeah.
you were saying, you played some D35s that have not been modded that sound great. They're just
Yeah.
great Martins. Yeah.
I guess the thing going back even to the examples that I mentioned, like the Music Master bass amp and the
Uh-huh.
Melody Maker, I
Uh-huh.
think if when compared to the Martin example, it would be more like the Music Master bass amp if you were like changing like transformers or something like that, saying
Right.
like this is like because this is actually the bass, the speaker is actually in that is almost measurably like not good. I mean, it has no
Yeah.
bass and it's really flimsy and cheap. So, I mean, the bridge plate in those Martins wasn't that. I mean, it was
Yeah.
actually a piece of really good wood. It was a different type of wood.
Yeah.
It was a good piece of wood, and it was, it was designed specifically to counter the thickness of
Yeah.
those guitar tops. So, yeah.
Well, a good analogy, I think, now that you're thinking about this, is amps. I mean, I listened to the amp podcast, Truth About Vintage Amps. Shout out to them. But yeah, a lot of people want to mod their amps such that it runs the tubes hotter, or it affects the circuit in a way that's negative, that hurts the amp, or will shorten the life of your tubes, or do certain things. So that's a great point. Whether it's a transformer or changing something about the amp that will, that wasn't intended in the original circuit, and then screwing up your amp because, oh, now it just burns up tubes, and so that's the analogy that comes to my mind, that to the Martin analogy, is that the mods that people want to do to their amp sometimes that are not in the best interest of their amp or them as the owner of the amp, right? But I think it is worth thinking about. It's because, I mean, we as human beings kind of have all these tendencies that we come up with that are often have, negative consequences, or consequences that we hadn't thought about before we endeavor to do these things. I mean, I can remember modding stuff when I was younger, and the result was that I fucked up this cool piece of gear that would have been worth some money one day. And it's kind of tangential to this, but it's doing something without thinking about it. And in the case I think we're talking about, though, it's a little different because, like we said, we're thinking that some people know better than the person that actually has it, was an electrical engineer that designed and built this damn thing, and we want
Right.
to
Or
change
yeah.
it.
That it wasn't thought out. I mean, in the
Yeah.
case, some of the stuff wasn't
Yeah.
thought out. I mean, it was
Yeah.
definitely thought out that they put those shitty speakers in the music bass amp.
Yeah. To
Like
save
we need to
money.
deliver a
Yeah.
bass amp for, $150 in,
That people can't play
1978.
bass through. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's just human nature. I've gone through that, and I'm glad I tried everything because that was part
Yeah.
of my decisions to make some of these things that like I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to mod another pedal, like another tube screamer pedal or something like that, because I'm just going to buy shit that I like, that's good, that I like.
Yeah.
And it saves a lot of heartache and makes me play. But I definitely don't. I mean, if someone's going through that, I definitely recommend you go ahead and try that. I mean, whatever, you got to learn about this shit yourself, but
Yeah.
don't do it to a D35 though.
No, and also I think, finding different sources that you trust and rely on, right? It's just like any other thing, like news sources or whatever. You got to sift through a bunch of stuff to find people that you think are pragmatic and are like Mark Sutman is a total. I trust him implicitly because he's had years of experience. He has empirical experience with this stuff, working on it physically on his with his hands, and he's not a purveyor of his own opinion being the end all be all. Like Chris is saying, his opinions are based on his own experience and him changing his mind when he finds out that some of the stuff he was doing was not in the best interest of the guitar or the piece of work he was working on. And so finding sources like that you trust and you think are well informed and well experienced, that's a great thing too, because I think, you know, before you want to do a mod or something like that, you want to check with experts that you trust, right? And again, there are lots of people out there that are experts or claim to be experts that have different varying opinions, right? Like amps, for instance, like some people think, oh, you got to replace all the caps on a vintage amp without even looking at the damn thing. And then there are other people who think, wait, let's look at the damn thing. And then what does the user want to do? Does this person want to take the amp out and play it in clubs? Do they just want to sit it on a shelf as a collectible? What do they want to do? That will determine what needs to be replaced or whatever. Or I have to look at it physically to see what needs to be replaced. Maybe all the caps don't need to be replaced. So finding experts, I think, that you trust and that you think are coming from a good place in terms of how they assess and process information, I think that's really important. You know?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's valuable to me. Like, and, you know, listen to podcasts and, or, you know, try to go to YouTube and check out some of these luthiers and amp builders and stuff and pedal builders, you know, and try to sift through the ones that you don't think make sense and find the ones that you think are giving sound advice and, you know, cross-reference, you know, there's lots of people in the industry and you can sift through it and soon find the people that are legit, I think. And that's helpful too, if you're thinking about doing a mod or thinking about fixing something that you think is broken.
It's just the fact that some things, like some people would just never think of buying a guitar and leaving the pickups that are in it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And because it becomes part of the process of getting his guitar now.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard somebody comment before that, like, I can't play off the shelf guitars. Like, I can't play like Fender, Gibson, anything like this. It's like, I mean, it's like somebody like, what are you in Led Zeppelin or what is your deal? And it's not. It's just somebody that plays guitar. It's like, you know, you probably could, because, you know, Gibson guitars sound pretty good. Fender guitars sound pretty good. And if you can't play those, it's not the guitar. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'll never understand that thing. You know, this keeps coming up in my mind, and I don't want to like speak against anybody that's making custom pedals or winding pickups or whatever, but it's like the idea that I would trust somebody who learned how to wind pickups off YouTube over Gibson. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, Gibson is the one that invented it, you know, and they're not. I mean, they still have some of the same equipment and everything else, and that's not to say that I would probably dig winding pickups. I think it's a great hobby and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But everybody just has this thought that like something that's more exclusive or that's more expensive or is going to be better.
Yeah.
You know, and I just don't buy that anymore. You know, unless, you know, I'm like I said. My thing, probably annoyingly, I talk about is I think people put way too much like importance on the role of pickups in a guitar.
Yeah.
And, you know, part of that is just because my experience in, you know, dozens or so times where I've changed them, when I've changed pickups for the same type of pickup, but, you know, maybe a different company, I've heard no difference.
Yeah.
I just learned to buy stuff that I like. You know, I like the sound.
Well, I think it's a great point just to get people to think, right? Because I think you're right. I for instance, at the shop, I see people come in all the time and go, they have a guitar, they bought it. They go, hey, what would be a great replacement pickup for this pick? I said, well, what's wrong with the one you have? Oh, it's okay. It's like, and then they go, what's a good pickup for this guitar? I said, dude, there are, you have, the choices are endless, but rather than do that, you know, spend a little more time with your guitar and think about whether or not you really want to replace that pickup. And to your point, exactly, there are people who have that mindset already before they buy a guitar. It's like, oh, I want to buy that one, but I know what pickups I'll put in that guitar. It's like, what are you thinking about? Like, why don't you play a bunch of guitars, and if it feels good and sounds good, buy the guitar and then play that guitar. And again, nothing, if you get a kick out of like buying something and getting parts for it and putting them together and doing it, that's cool. That's a whole other guitar thing too that people love to do. But yeah, I think you're right. It's like, I think just people need to think more about on the front end of like, you know, before you're going to buy a guitar, like, well, you know, exactly. It was, a lot of these configurations were thought out. You can get great sounds out of this guitar as it is, right? It's got
Right.
pickup switching. You can have the treble pickup. You can have both pickups. You can have just the bass pickup. You've got tone controls. So within the context of just what you're buying, you've already got a bunch of options that you can deal with, right? Rather than
Yeah.
just swapping stuff out.
Right. That video that I sent you, I thought was really great for illustrating. And I forget the guitar company, some like new guitar company. And this idea has been used before, but it was kind of, this is a modern version of it, where they have this guitar, and I forget what the woods were. I think maybe it was mahogany. And kind of like, I think it was a set neck guitar, kind of Gibson-esque, but it had their own shape or something. And they had these little wooden blocks that had pickup configurations in them, and you slid them in and
Oh
out.
yeah. Yeah.
And he's playing it and he's sliding it out. And sure, when he puts in the three single coil block, it sounds like single coil pickups, but it never doesn't sound like the guitar. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
It's like the guitar. I still think people don't realize how much a guitar, the sum of a guitar's parts makes the guitar sound like what it is. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
And if you change a pickup, let's say you had a Stratocaster, right? And let's say I went out and I bought a Mexican standard Stratocaster. I don't even think they make them anymore, but the Mexican standard Stratocaster, which comes with ceramic pickups, which a lot of people don't like. And if you change those for, like an El Nico pickup or something like that, you're going to hear a difference, definitely, because it's going to have less output. The magnet is a little bit, it's a different magnet construction, but what that means is it's like the output level is different. So it's definitely going to make a difference. But, if you go the other way and change like, a vintage wound pickup for another vintage wound pickup of another company, you're not going to hear a difference. I don't think
Yeah.
you would hear any
Yeah.
difference whatsoever. And people will argue to the death, but in my experience, you don't. And according to Roger Mayer, you won't either. I'm kind of like clinging to that, and I'm
Yeah.
okay with I'm
Yeah.
okay with being wrong. I mean, I think Gibson still makes the best P90 pickup out there. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
It's
It's a
like
great
certainly
pickup.
good enough for anything else. And if it's like you don't like your Junior because you don't like the sound of it's changing pickups I don't think is going to do anything to it unless you're
Yeah.
going from some really low output to some really high output. And a lot of times, what you can do in the case of pickups is just lower or raise the pickup, and it's going to do the
Right.
same thing as
Right.
changing a $150 pickup for a $300 pickup when you could have just raised or lowered the pickup.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, but this is something I learned over time. I like I said, I've done at least 12 times. I've like playing. I changed pickups at the guitar shop for somebody once. It was like it had an Epiphone Les Paul, and he was putting like some Gibson or some style like a swanky pickup in there. And he made me show him the pickup. I put him in the case, but he had to look in the case to see if they were still there because he said it sounded exactly like it did before.
Yeah.
So I mean,
And you're like,
that's
yeah,
I mean,
that's funny.
so I mean, I'm not saying there's not a difference, but the difference is not
Negligible. Yeah.
right. Unless you went extreme, like you did in your Les
Explorer.
Paul.
Yeah.
Or
It
your
came with
Explorer,
super,
yeah.
it came with super high output pickups, which sounded like shit.
And
And
you
I
put the more
put in
vintage style.
lower. Yeah. And like you were saying, it was just a lower output pickup that I like the sound of. Yeah. And again, but that's, you make a great point. It's just like get people to think about it, and some people need to just go through the journey themselves and do it physically to find out, to get to that result and go, yeah, the difference is really negligible. So maybe I should just experiment more with my own guitar and raise or lower the pickups and mess with the settings so that, because I mean, I'm guilty of like not messing with my settings a ton. Like for the longest, I have everything's on 10 usually. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if I've got a two pickup guitar with, two volumes and two tones, only sometimes do I mess with the tone and pickup configuration. But again, like, there's you can do a lot to change the sound of your guitar if you really want to, without changing pickups by just messing with the configuration and the tone and the volume and all that other crap, and yeah. So I think that's a great point.
I want to do counterpoint to your messing with the guitar. This just came up. This just came up recently because I was feeling shitty about my guitar playing because I'm like,
Yeah.
I see all these videos, someone playing a fuzz box or a dirt pedal, and they're like, check it out. And now roll back the volume and it cleans up. And I've never fucking done that. I have everything on 10. But to me, and I tested this. I tried it in my room I had a really good sound, and I'm trying with a dirt pedal, and I'm trying this. For me, it makes much more sense to leave everything on 10 and change your dynamic. It's more dynamic. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, that's a
It's
good point.
like, I
Yeah.
mean, it's sure that cleans up. I have this dirt pedal. You dig in, it's really, it's got a lot of grit and but you turn the volume down, it cleans up. You play later, it cleans up, but you still
Yeah.
have the dynamic. I
Yeah.
can see maybe with a fuzz pedal, it's still going to be that roaring, like, "Brrr." So that
Yeah.
might make a little bit more difference, but I don't think there's anything wrong with the people who have anything on 10 is what I'm saying. I'm standing
Yeah.
up for those people that, because I'm a 10,
I
being on
appreciate that, man.
10 person, but no, I mean, dynamics for me is what it's all about. So, I mean,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
loud guitar played quiet has more dynamics than just playing the same with the same attack and turning things down. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Touch can be huge.
So
Just the touch of the guitar player.
fuck those turn the guitar down people. I'm in the, yeah,
10. Mine
10,
goes
I'm a
to
10.
11. Mine goes to 11. Yeah. Well, that was fun. Yeah. You and I have talked about this before, and this video kind of came along that kind of triggered a discussion about it. Think about the unintended consequences, and and especially for these acoustic guitars, man, because it's a huge deal. You can really mess things up. Yeah, just give it some thought, man, before you decide to take the plunge. Be thoughtful about your choices in mods, or
Buy shit you like. I mean, that's how I deal with this. I
or you
only
can do that.
buy shit I like, unless it's something like I get a good deal on and it has like a
Right.
fault with it, then I can,
Yeah.
fix that. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I've just like, I don't buy shit because like thinking like, oh, this would be really good if I just did this. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Because
Yeah.
usually this doesn't work. Again, lastly, I mean, I'm sure I say this every 5 minutes, but it was like a big eye opener for me. Just about everything,
Uh-huh.
like, is always a sum of its parts thing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like, and the more parts that you leave in, the more it's going to sound like it is. And that's why you can have, again, with the tube screamer, go grab 5 tube screamers, plug them into an amp and sit there and play. And, and maybe one of them sounds magical. And it's like, because it's just the sum of the parts lead to that point. But I still think you can probably get that sound with any of those if with a little bit of different tweaking. But
Yeah.
anyways, I'm not going down that path. I just wanted to point that out. Fuck
No,
it.
no, I love it, man. I love it. Yeah. It's just, be thoughtful. Be thoughtful out there. Ding
Yeah.
dongs. All right. Well, thanks so much for listening. We really appreciate it. And as I said before, our social media platforms, we're trying to segue over to Blue Sky because I think they're trying to do the right thing, and we dig it. And so if you're a follower of ours, head over to Blue Sky, check out Chris and Rick Talk Guitars on there. We'd love to have you over there. We're members of the Ruinous Media Network, and they have lots of other great musical content on their thingamajig, their site. And so, yeah, thanks for listening. And until next time, what do you got, Chris?
Bye.